From the Library of Congress in Washington, D.C.
I went to Penn State. I studied journalism and Spanish art and history, and I went for a semester to the University of Salamanca, which I really loved, and where I learned much more about Queen Isabella. Then one day I took a train from Madrid to Salamanca, and I found myself on one of those old trains they had in Spain that was very, very slow. I'm sure a number of you have taken those slow trains in Spain that they had before the wonderful trains they have now. We had a long layover in a remote and poor town called Madrigal de las Altas Torres. And so I took a little bit of time to walk around. It was dusty, unpaved streets, a poor town. And I remember that there were children in shabby clothes playing in the dirt by the sides of the road. And then I happened upon a brick wall in front of what was a rather unprepossessing two-story building. And I saw a little plaque on the wall. And it had been put there by a group of businessmen from Texas. It said that Isabella had been born in that building in 1451. Eureka! This was the queen that I was looking for. She had had so much global impact, and she had come from this town, from this unlikely place, and she had changed the world. I found this fascinating, and it only increased my interest in learning more about Isabella. I went into journalism. I worked at the Washington Post for 20 years, mainly doing business journalism. And finally, I got a chance to write a book, and it turned into my biography of Frances Perkins called The Woman Behind the New Deal. And from that, I got another book contract, and at last I got a chance and the time to fully explore the life of Queen Isabella of Castile. This is that book, and this is what I found. And I'd like to start by showing you some pictures and maps that will help you to visualize more of these things. This is the cover of the book. It's an artistic rendition of Isabel that we did from historic paintings and historic paintings of the crown that she wore. This is a map of Isabel of Spain during Isabel's time. You can see how it's splintered into a number of kingdoms which were often at war with each other. It was a very unstable place to live, very frightening. People mainly lived in castles for self-protection. I want to set the backdrop a little further here. This is the Christian world in the year 600. You can see how far Christianity had spread, how far into Europe it had gone. This was the Europe and Middle East of the 600s. Muhammad was born. Islam spread very quickly. This is the Islamic world in the year 750. Within 150 years, much of the area around the Mediterranean Sea has gone from Christian control to Islamic control. And you see three of the old capitals of Christianity, Alexandria, Jerusalem, and Antioch, are now Islamic controlled. And of course, one of the things they had done is conquered Spain. This is Europe at the time of Isabella. Down in the bottom of the boot of Italy, you'll see the island of Sicily. Do you all see that? That, in fact, was the first country of which Isabel was technically the ruler. When she married Ferdinand, she became the Queen of Sicily because he was the King of Sicily. So one of the things that you need to understand is that part of her worldview is anchored not just around Spain, but her sense of responsibility for the boot of Italy as well. Here we have a picture of Isabel reading the Bible with the Holy Family. I show you that just because it's just very interesting. Most depictions of Isabel show her with dark hair and dark eyes, and in fact she and all her family had red gold hair going to Auburn, and it's just interesting to see. Here are Isabella's childhood homes. Home sweet home. Tells you a lot. This is the place where she got ready to take the throne. Look at how that's perched on a cliff. These are people who felt that they were under threat. This is the Hall of the Kings in the palace in Segovia, in the Alcazar. There, around the top of the room are niches for statues that Isabel saw as her ancestors for the last 24 or so generations. She considered her earliest ancestor in that lineup to be Pelayo, who was a Visigothic warrior who had fought the Muslims when they had invaded Spain. So she sees her lineage as 24 generations of fighting to reconquer Spain. Every decision that she makes, her ancestors are looking down on her. Ferdinand and Isabel. Isabel's daughter, who was considered to be the one who was most like her, Catherine of Aragon, who married Henry VIII. On the right is Isabel's daughter, Juana, who became the next Queen of Spain after her mother died. She's married to Felipe the Fair. Felipe had quite a wandering eye. So did Isabel's husband, Ferdinand. And you can see in this picture, he's already sort of taking a glance around. You can see she doesn't look happy. I'd say this is one of the most telling paintings I found, depictions of Isabel and her family. And when I found this painting, I was amazed and incredulous because it tells you so much about the psychology of Isabel. Many of us over the years have seen many pictures of royal families, often royal families with religious figures. What's different with this is Isabel and her family, you see there she is down there with Ferdinand and 3 of their children. They're being guarded by the Virgin Mary, and they're actually being menaced by demons. This is a woman who was very afraid. This is what she was afraid of. This is the expanding empire of the Ottoman Turks between 1451 and 1574. All those crossed swords represent major battles that occurred. The big and most important battle that affected Isabel the most was that Constantinople, the ancient home of Christianity, fell to the Turks in 1453 when she was 2 years old, and the Turks promised that they were going to conquer all of Europe. She took that threat seriously, and you can see by all the battles that were fought in the next 150 years that it wasn't an idle threat by the Turks. This is the particular person she was afraid of. His name is Mehmet the Conqueror, and it has been estimated that he killed 29,000 people a year during his time on the planet. Here is a contemporary portrait of an attack by the Turks on a Venetian city. One of the things that they would do is capture Christian and Jewish women and sell them into slavery. This is an interesting picture in itself. The woman who's being carried away here, you can tell is a noblewoman because she's wearing a red silk dress. Red was very expensive dye at that time. That tells us she was a noblewoman, and you see her getting dragged away. This was something that was a very real threat and fear at that time. So Isabel decided that she needed to throw the Moors out of the south of Spain. And she did it from this perch, a fortress in Cordoba. This was her base of operations. She and her family went to live there while she led troops for 10 years into battle. These are some of the towns they had to conquer. It's the town of Ronda. They besieged it. A lot of the Moorish cities as well were heavily fortified, and it was very difficult to conquer them. Isabel commissioned a series of 20 carvings to commemorate the battle. They were all scenes that happened during the course of the war. She commissioned 20. They're the seat backs. They're the backs of the choir stall in the cathedral in Toledo, and they are the scenes from the war, painted, carved during the time of Isabella's lifetime. And so at first she commissioned 20. She thought the war would soon be over. Then she had to commission 20 more because the war went on longer. And ultimately there were 54 separate battle scenes depicted in the choir stall chairs. I picked this one in particular. It's very interesting. It's a suicide attack by a Moorish soldier attacking people he believes to be Ferdinand and Isabella in their encampment. The attack didn't succeed. But you can see how they set themselves up in tents outside the city walls to conduct these wars. This is another kind of startling image that you have to go looking for in Spain. This is the Church of San Juan de los Reyes in Spain. It's in Toledo. This is the church that Isabel commissioned to celebrate her triumphs. You'll see some things hanging off the walls there. Can anybody tell me what those are? They're chains. They are the chains that were moved from captive Christians that were freed in cities after the Spaniards defeated the Moors. They found thousands of Christians in captivity in Andalusia. This is the beautiful city of Granada, really one of the most spectacular places in the world, and it's a place where you can really see the majesty and the artistry of Islamic art. If you haven't been there before, I really suggest you go. It's very beautiful. In a lot of ways, it's the culmination of artistic traditions, Jewish, Christian, and Muslim, and it's well worth a visit. But you can also see that it was a difficult place to try to conquer. Here is a Romantic era painting in the 1800s of Isabel accepting the surrender of Granada. Isabel also commissioned some sculptures, wood carvings that were in other places. This one is in her burial place in the city of Granada, which is where she's buried. I selected this one because it's really important to you to see. One of the reasons that she was able to get the Muslims in the south of Spain to, in many cases, agree to surrender was that she told them that they could keep their religion. She did not keep that promise. And here you see some heavily veiled Muslim women being forcibly converted and baptized. This is a very dramatic scene showing the expulsion of the Jews. The Jews were amazed and horrified when this expulsion order came down. They had not been expecting it. Many of them had there were many Jewish families that were high-ranking in Spain, and they viewed her as friendly to them. And then suddenly this edict came down, and within just a brief period of time, everyone had to go. Isabel had decided that having Jews in the kingdom of Spain, in her kingdom, was making it hard to maintain the loyalty of people who had been Jewish, who had converted to Christianity. And she thought if they left, she would turn Spain into a bastion of Catholicism, which she did. But obviously at some human cost to people who loved and cherished their own faith and wanted to keep it. This is one of the examples of all the problems that came as a result of the Inquisition. And Isabel really is responsible for launching the Inquisition. She was the queen at the time that it happened. Later on, her children, in fact, in the statue niches in Segovia now, when you go there and you see the statues of Isabel and Ferdinand, her children later wrote that Ferdinand was responsible for creating the Inquisition, not Isabel. But the fact is, she was the queen. The fact is, she was responsible. And what she unleashed was something that was horrifying. It was a way of controlling how people think, how people feel, their faith, and ultimately how they think on all other things politically as well. She had set something very bad in motion. Initially, the intent was to clean out heresy, to get rid of people who were heretics, but it ended up being a political tool that could be used against anyone who was a wrong thinker. So in this case, this is her very beloved confessor, Fernan de Talavera. He was a converso. He was a Christian of Jewish descent. He was widely viewed as one of the holiest men in Spain. She had assigned him to become the Archbishop of Granada to help with the conversion. But after she died, he was subjected to the Inquisition himself. And as a very old man, he was stripped naked and beaten in the streets of Seville, of Granada, in something that you could only say was that this terrible political tool had been set loose that could be used against anyone.